Hi everybody, and welcome to the Heel Heat Top 10. My name is George Coles. This is my tag team partner, Johnny Grunge.
Thanks, Balls Mahoney. Gary Rhodes, everybody.
And this week, this show, our theme for the Top 10 is Top 10 Paul Heyman Guys. As you can see, we're both wearing ECW shirts. And I'll go ahead and start it right off. Number 10, Sabu. The guy that the original ECW, when it first started getting off the ground, was the focus of the show and the embodiment of what ECW was going to be.
I totally agree with you. Him and the Tasmaniac were a hell of a tag team together. The brutality of Sabu.
And the innovation, I mean.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy wasn't afraid to hurt you by hurting himself.
Well, you got to remember, too, I mean, some of the stuff he did then, everybody does now, but the split-legged moonsaults, the diving over the ropes, that was revolutionary when he was doing it. I mean, he was an innovative high flyer, aside from being a tremendous brawler.
Well, the showmanship, too. They brought him out like he was Hannibal Lecter, and then he unleashed his beast, which they sold at 100%.
Oh, yeah. And he was a highlight for many years in ECW, one of the mainstays and one of the main focuses, and several-time ECW World Champion, brought back on when they did the remake in WWE as well to launch it.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of an original, our number 9, or ECW original, our number 9, Joey Styles.
Oh my God!
This man has made these people superstars by the way he talked them up in his old days. And even when he was on Raw, he was really an intricate part of the show, building up young superstars at that point. Because when he was on there, Cena was getting his very first, starting his first run.
Well, the thing of it is that people don't respect Joey Styles as much as they should, because Joey Styles is the first guy to ever call a wrestling pay-per-view by himself. And his work with Cyrus the Virus, Don Callis, I thought was amazing. And he was always a guy, that was there. He added to ECW so much on his commentary that it made that show. It made, the revolution wasn't just the wrestlers and the booking. It was the guy commentating as well.
Oh, most definitely.
I mean, he was calling wrestling moves at a time where no one else was calling wrestling, and no one is now.
No, I liked it when he called the shows because he called them matches. He didn't try to build for the next guy coming out.
Yeah.
The 2 guys that were in a ring, or 4 guys, whoever was in that ring, was the focal point of his conversation.
Yep.
And he built these guys up. I think nowadays when you have a match with, let's say, Mysterio and Cody Rhodes, I want to hear about Mysterio and Cody Rhodes, the guys that are in the ring. I don't want to hear about the next guy. I don't want to hear about John Cena the whole show. I don't want to hear about what's happening somewhere else the whole show. I want to hear about these guys in this match.
Speaking of shows, our number 8 guy, The Big Show. Now, a lot of you people might scratch your head on this, but if you remember back to when Paul Heyman came into the WWE, Big Show was floundering. He had went through some of the goofy gimmicks, the Shokishi stuff. He was even sent down to OVW at that time. He was put on SmackDown with Paul Heyman as the head of SmackDown, and something clicked, and he brought the monster back out of Big Show.
Heyman wasn't the GM yet.
No, but he was one of the writers.
He was the writers, and plus he was the manager of Brock Lesnar. And Show was the first person to pin Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, and he helped to bring the monster back out of Big Show. And like we talked about when we were making the list, it probably extended Big Show's career another 7-8 years. I think if it wasn't for Paul Heyman, he would have retired and took like his $5-10 million, whatever he made at that point, and just said, okay, I could live off of this forever. Whereas Heyman made him back to a monster, made him a viable contender, made him to this day, you could put him in a main event and no one's like, oh, that's that goofy guy. No, they're like, that's the Big Show. He's a dominating guy.
Exactly. Now, speaking of dominance, our number 7 is dominated by 2 wrestlers in one of the biggest feuds ever in professional wrestling, and it was all at the hands of Paul Heyman, Tommy Dreamer, and Raven.
And you can't say one without the other. That's why we're putting them together here. The history of ECW is written with this feud. This feud is the greatest feud in ECW history, one of the greatest feuds in wrestling history. This was the feud, and Raven was the guy that Paul Heyman, he absolutely loved writing stuff for Raven because Raven could take it to where no one else could. And Tommy Dreamer was just a workhorse. He was the guy, he was the ultimate face in a company full of heels.
Well, with Raven, I always liked about Raven. Raven's what brought me into watching ECW because I remember his old Johnny Polo days, his Scotty or Johnny Flamingo days. And when I turn the channel, I see this guy all dressed up in grunge rock, grunge rock clothes, and I see this guy, this dark character, really forming wrestling nirvana. That's what Paul Heyman called ECW, and I think he would have had that wrestling nirvana at that point if it wasn't for the character of Raven.
Or Dreamer even.
Well,
you needed Dreamer for Raven to work, and you needed Raven for Dreamer to work.
It's like in the comic books. Every great hero needs a great villain. Yes. And these two worked great together against each other, and then when years come by, they were tag team champions together when they beat the Dudleys.
That storyline was great too.
So you really took a look at the storyline, the length of this feud. How many years was that feud?
I mean, it was 2-3 years, and then when Raven came back, the feud just picked up. First they came back as a tag team. That Dreamer didn't understand why Raven helped him, and then it just picked up right where it left off. I mean, in my opinion, it's the greatest feud in wrestling history. I'm very biased on it though.
Well, honestly, if I'm a fan, and if I was walking through a town and they were having wrestling that night, and the main event was Tommy Dreamer versus Raven with some smaller federations, I would make my way to see this show.
Yeah. Because
these two guys, I don't care their age now or what have you, but these two guys would put on a match great against each other.
Exactly. Now our next guy, number 6, is a guy that put on great matches all over the world. One of the greatest talents, one of the greatest athletes in the history of wrestling, Rob Van Dam. He's a guy that did a couple things. He did a little bit with WCW, didn't really go anywhere. Paul Heyman brought him into a show, let him be himself, and let him, either with his tag team with Sabu or on his own, gave him a 2-year run as the TV champion, making him as big, the TV championship, as big as the world championship. And sad to say, at some points at Rob Van Dam's title run, it was bigger than the world title. And just because the athlete he was, and him coming back and doing, him coming up with the one night stand, bringing Paul back into it, and Paul giving him when they relaunched ECW, Rob Van Dam was the main guy. He was the guy that they put both belts on, the WWE and ECW belt, and he would have been the flagship if it wasn't for the trouble him and Sabu got in.
Exactly. Well, if you look back at some of his best matches with Jerry Lynn back in the day, were just breathtaking. They would hold up to any of these matches nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like not too long ago for us because we watch these matches, but a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old match is like ancient compared to some of these matches now. But if you were to play any of their matches on television now, you'd have a captivated audience.
Exactly.
Now, speaking number 5, a guy that revolutionized at one point. We're hard on the guy mostly now, but Rey Mysterio.
Yeah.
Rey Mysterio at this point, when he first went to ECW, by the who was it that invited him?
Conan brought Mysterio and Psychosis into ECW, and Paul Heyman said, we got the product where we could put luchadors on our show, and we could bring Mexican-style wrestling to America, which WCW took and ran with it. No fault to them. They had the money to do it. But he brought Rey Mysterio and brought a totally different style of wrestling. And then Rey goes on to bigger and greater things, goes into WCW, and the cruiserweights were a lot of the reason why people tuned in. And he was the main guy And the reason he's on our Paul Heyman guy list is when Paul Heyman comes back and works for SmackDown, he's the first guy that actually puts Mysterio in the main events.
One of the first persons to write him in the storylines.
Yeah.
But what I was saying, when Mysterio first showed up to ECW, you could see the fans were like, holy shit, this is just something totally different. I mean, the famous spot where they're doing the spot on top of that...
the bird's nest.
Well, not just the bird's nest, that was a badass spot too, but when they did the spot on top of the car, and Paul's like, I'm glad I'm was his dad's a lawyer, or I would never have gotten away with half the shit we got away with. And it brought a lot of excitement.
Yeah. And it was a nice change of pace in what... See, a lot of people think of ECW as just blood and guts. It had its fair share of blood and guts, don't get me wrong. But there was some of the greatest wrestling matches in the history of wrestling happened in ECW. Mysterio and Psychosis was an amazing match. I think they did 2 or 3 there. Every time it tore the house down. Like you said with Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn. Some of the greatest matches in the history of wrestling.
Sabu and Taz.
Yeah, Sabu and Taz. I mean, you had some absolute wrestling clinics happening in ECW. And to people that never really watched ECW and only read and heard about it, they think of it as a garbage federation, but it really wasn't. It was everything. It had all kinds of wrestling: Mexican wrestling, Japanese wrestling, hardcore wrestling, submission wrestling, anything you could think of. They highlighted the style, and Mysterio is just another piece of the puzzle of what Paul Heyman brought into American wrestling.
I know you've been waiting for this one.
Our number 4, the greatest tag team of all time, Bubba Ray and Devon, the Dudley Boys.
The Dudley Boys in ECW would incite riots. These guys were just... I mean, I love the way they berate the fans.
Oh, yeah.
And the fans that eat it up with spoons and want it more and want it more.
And behind the scenes, both of them worked so much hand in hand with Paul Heyman, stuffing the orders, putting these shirts in the bag so they could be sent out, filling out, when you ordered from ECW a DVD, or at that time a VHS cassette, a t-shirt, a program, anything, it was either put into your order was either filled by Tommy Dreamer, Little Guido, or Bubba Ray Dudley. And Devon worked with it as well. I forget. Devon did some of the booking. Bubba did a lot of the booking with Tommy. And
Devon was still a postal worker at that point, still, wasn't he?
Well, he was relatively new to the business, too. He came in relatively new. They stuck them together. The Dudleys, before they had the Dudley Boy tag team, was kind of a goof gimmick. When they stuck Bubba Ray and Devon, for some reason, that just clicked with the fans, and they lit it up to the point that it's almost 20 years later, and they're still
putting it to fans.
They're still one of the greatest tag teams of all time. Bubba Ray Dudley, Bully Ray, is a world champion right now. They just reunited in TNA as part of the Aces and Eights. But the Dudley Boys, they're all the way, they're Paul Heyman guys. They wanted to stick to him so much that when WWE came calling, they said, we don't want you to match WWE. We just want you to give us a $1 raise. And he said, I can't do it. Because he knew it would be better for them and their careers to go to WWE and make the mega bucks.
And they did. They made history. 23-time tag team champions?
23 times.
All right.
More than some people even wrestle matches.
Well, our number 3 guy has made I'm a Paul Heyman guy a household statement. And that guy is CM Punk. Cookie Monster Punk. CM Punk.
Charles Montgomery Punk.
Charles Montgomery Punk. Okay. CM Punk owes a lot of to himself and owes a lot of his success. Well, I'll say success to Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman saw something in him when he was in OVW to bring him in there and help enhance his character. Because Punk was already a Ring of Honor champion. Well, he was already in all the indies.
The thing was, and if you've watched the CM Punk DVD, he says himself that they hired him based off of a buzz. He don't think they ever watched any of his matches. But they hired CM Punk. They weren't doing nothing with him. Paul Heyman said, let me do something with him. They relaunched ECW. Again, it's a sore subject. I know everybody hates the new ECW. But when they relaunched it, he said, let me bring CM Punk to TV. He gave CM Punk his first exposure in the new ECW. He's one of the first people that they made off of that show.
Would you say CM Punk is the phoenix from the tragedy of the new ECW?
Well, I mean, you got a lot of great wrestlers that... A lot of your main eventers now came off of that show. Sheamus came from there. His first exposure was there. CM Punk. John Morrison's first real chance at being a big name was through there. I mean, a lot of guys went through that. I mean, it could have went on, and the problem was the initials they gave it. If they called it anything else but ECW, people would have been okay with it. They called it ECW, and it wasn't ECW.
It's tried to be at first, but then it just got watered down. It was just like SmackDown too.
It turned into NXT, which is okay. NXT is fine.
Great product, but it's not ECW.
It's not ECW, and you can't call. That's like when Coke brought out New Coke.
Okay.
You know, New Coke isn't Coke.
But we're talking about the Pepsi guy. We're talking about CM Punk.
Yeah, CM Punk. He's the guy.
Yeah, I was waiting to get to the Coke thing with Pepsi.
There you go. He's the guy that brought Paul Heyman back into relevance. He's one of Paul Heyman's absolute best friends in the world. And, I mean, the two of them, he doesn't need Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman doesn't need him. But when you put the two of them together, it's like getting a steak and then having your potato on the side.
Then getting your steak and having lobster with it.
Yeah, having a lobster tail laying on top.
Because, I mean, that's how awesome these two guys work together. People weren't really buying the heel Punk at first.
Well, people still want to cheer him.
They still want to cheer him. But with Heyman, people got to boo Heyman. I mean, they love him to death, but the only way you can react to him is booing him. You know, I mean, he's never going to be the baby face. But with CM Punk and him together, that whole end of his title run with the last 6 months of it was fucking phenomenal. I'm sorry, that was one of the best title runs in years.
Well, it's the longest run in 25 plus years.
But it was the best. I mean, I was very satisfied with that run, except for he wasn't main eventing every pay-per-view like he should have.
You know whose title runs were even better?
Who's that?
Our number 2 guy.
Oh, true.
The Rattlesnake, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, again, some of you guys might know the backstory, some of you might not. Steve Austin was part of the Dangerous Alliance in WCW, closely worked with Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman said, you know, this guy is going to be one of the brightest stars in our business within 10 years, which he was. About 7 years later, he became the biggest star in the history of wrestling. However, WCW cuts him. Paul Heyman goes, well, I got a TV show if you want to come and air your grievances.
Well, damn it.
Steve Austin couldn't even wrestle at the time. He said, I got TV time. You come? He said, well, what do you want me to do? Just talk. And that was the genesis of what would become the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. Stone Cold cracked his first beer in ECW. Stone Cold went to what became his famous way of talking. 1 beer, 2 beer. He did that. That came from ECW. Before that, he tried to play a pretty boy character, which he did very successfully. Don't get me wrong. However, Stunning Steve Austin became Stone Cold Steve Austin through his experience in ECW. And he if you watch his DVD, he credits Paul Heyman for helping him to break out and become the biggest character in wrestling history.
What can you say? You can't deny it.
Exactly.
If you want to watch some of those on YouTube, some of the interviews he did for ECW, just put Austin ECW interviews.
Well, I think they're on his
promos.
DVDs.
Yeah, they're on his DVDs, but if you don't have them, look it up.
Yeah.
Some of the best promos of all time were from ECW, from the basement of Paul Heyman's house.
Yeah, or in the very back of the ECW arena.
You know, I mean, these guys honed their craft with the help of Paul Heyman and became superstars.
Now, as you guys know, if you've watched any of our top 10s before we get to number 1, we do a best of the rest. It's basically guys that just barely missed the list, not in no particular order. And the first guy is my absolute favorite wrestler, Mick Foley, a.k.a. Cactus Jack. The reason why he's not on this list, I think Paul Heyman helped everybody else on this list's career more than him. I think, you know, as it's seen on the new Mankind DVD, Jim Ross was trying to get Vince McMahon to sign Mick Foley years before he actually did. Now, ECW helped him to get there because Vince seen some of that stuff and liked it, seen some of the promos and liked it. However, I think Foley would have got there without him.
Another guy, Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero, some of the matches he's had with Malenko were phenomenal matches. Taz, but when you talk about these matches, the actual real wrestling part of it, Eddie Guerrero brought a lot of that to the table for the ECW shows.
And that's another guy. He brought a different style of wrestling, and he brought that style through ECW. And then you got, speaking of Malenko, the Triple Threat, the original Triple Threat. Shane Douglas, Dean Malenko, and Chris Benoit. Three of the best workers to come out of the mid to late 90s, all honed their craft under the guidance of Paul Heyman. Now, Shane, he was a dick, so he didn't really get the national exposure he probably should have. But Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko went on to bigger and better things. Chris Benoit is a multiple-time world champion. Dean Malenko is somebody that should have been a world champion. Shane Douglas was a multiple-time ECW champion. Probably should have been a WCW or WWF champion as well. He was that good.
He was. Another guy, former ECW champion. Guy came to WWE, debuted, beating Kurt Angle, taking care of Kurt Angle's undefeated streak. Taz.
The Human Suplex Machine. Billed as an absolute monster as a 5'8" guy in ECW, and no one did not believe it.
Or didn't.
Yeah, no one. They suspended disbelief.
No one doubted it.
But basically, that's what we have for our best and the rest. If you guys like our list, if you think we put someone up too high, someone down too low, left someone off altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on our Twitter, hit us up on Facebook, put it down where?
Down there.
Right down there in the comments. You should have did the Singapore King for this one.
Yeah. There.
There you go.
A little late, but I'll give it to him.
And our number one guy,
Brock Lesnar. Good on better.
No one wrestler has benefited more from being associated with Paul Heyman than the Beast Incarnate, Brock Lesnar.
The next big thing would have been another big body.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, Brock had it in the ring, but he couldn't talk.
He still can't.
That's why they brought Paul back. And these two together are like...
it's perfect.
It's like peanut butter and jelly, man. It's like...
As good as Paul Heyman is with CM Punk, he's just as good as with Brock Lesnar. Because the one thing that Paul Heyman does more than anybody else is he accentuates the positives and hides the negatives. That's the reason why guys like Axl Rotten, Balls Mahoney, the Sandman, guys that you wouldn't consider great wrestlers, became stars because a guy like Paul Heyman could see where they excelled at and push the fans to enjoy where they excel. Brock Lesnar is one of the greatest amateur wrestlers in the history of amateur wrestling. And we're talking about a guy that's, about 6 foot, he's 6'6", 280 pounds.
295.
295 now?
Yeah, that's what he was always comfortable at when he was there at first. And that's what he's about right now again.
He absolutely flies around the ring with the speed of a guy like Rey Mysterio.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not maybe as quick as Mysterio.
Oh, no, he's fast.
Maybe now Rey Mysterio 10 knee surgeries in, but not the. But I mean, Brock Lesnar is an absolute wrestling machine, and he's somebody that probably would have got buried in the shuffle and scooted out like a Nathan Jones if he wasn't associated with Paul Heyman.
Exactly.
And he makes Brock Lesnar scary. Because Brock Lesnar's not... I mean, looking at him, he's physically intimidating. But once he talks, he's not scary.
No. That's what Paul's there for. But that's about it on my side.
Basically, that's all I have now. This has been our top 10 for Paul Heyman Guys. My name is George Coles.
I'm Gary Rhodes.
And this has been a Heel Heat Top 10.